On today's show, keys to the Rockets' turnaround after their 0-2 start this season, Alperen Sengun's insane playmaking leap, and so much more. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Fridays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. On today's show, we're going to be getting into how the Rockets were able to turn things around after their 0-2 start this season, the biggest keys to that turnaround, as well as Alperen Sengun's insane playmaking leap this season. Plus, why Ja Morant is a terrible fit for this Rockets team, and a look ahead at the Rockets-Grizzlies matchup Wednesday night. First, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. And joining us now is your weekly co-host, the Podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Rockets Launch Pod, Ben DuBose. You can track down on Blue Sky at Ben DuBose. And Ben, we are far removed from that 0-2 start that spelled doom and gloom for this entire Rockets season, and fans were careening themselves off cliff sides, and everybody, the sky was falling. And now this Rockets team, number one offense in the NBA, a top 10 defense, currently sitting at 7th. It might change by the time we finish recording this pod, as there's a slate of Tuesday night games going on, and it's still very early in the season. So that's, bound to happen with how the, rankings and everything go. But as we look at this team, now 6 games in, riding a 4-game win streak, after that 0-2 start, let's kind of get into what we think some of the keys to this turnaround have been. If really a turnaround was needed, because that might be the better way to frame it. After that 0-2 start, did you feel like there was a massive shift or an adjustment that you felt like led to this 4-game win streak?
Not immediately. I think the biggest immediate shift was the schedule easing up. The first week was really difficult with OKC and Detroit. The second week with Brooklyn and Toronto, not so much. So the difficulty sort of flipped from the first 2 games to the next 2. But I do think what's happened the last 2 games in particular is very encouraging, because you're seeing the defense come around. Like when they evened the record at 2-2 last week, they were ranked first on offense, but 19th on defense. And that was so Ime Udoka-like. And I asked some people inside the building if they were worried at all, and if Dorian Finney-Smith could potentially fix it, or if this was something that, after losing Fred VanVleet, could be difficult without roster changes to improve. And they basically told me, don't worry about defense. It's going to get resolved because of Ime. And I think that's what we're seeing. Like, if you don't play hard-nosed defense for Ime Udoka, you're not going to play. And I asked him before the Dallas game what was different about that when they had in Boston, where it was a really strong two-way performance. They gave up just 72 points in the first 3 quarters, only 10 of 30 from 3 for a Celtics team that is really known for putting up a ton of threes at volume. And basically what Ime told me was, we took it more personally. They had a couple of days off. Everybody wants to play in the Garden. It's only if you're a Western Conference team 1 time per year that you play in Boston, Saturday night game, and they went out and they took it seriously. And I think we saw a continuation of that on Monday against Cooper Flagg and the Mavericks. It's an in-state rivalry. It's a game that, at least defensively, they seem to take very seriously. Offensively, they couldn't shoot, but I don't think that's due to a lack of trying. And so one other thing Ime told me in his answer was that he felt like the Nets and Raptors games were sort of the team maybe coasting because they just didn't get up for the opponent. I think the last couple of games, the Celtics and the Mavericks, those are teams that you play a little bit harder when you see those types of opponents. I know with injuries, they're not what they normally are, but they're a step above the Nets and the Raptors. And so looking at where they are now, you have the top offense, and you now have the number 7 defense. And I think that's the big shift. To start the year, there are a lot of new pieces. You lost a couple of your big communicators in Fred and Dylan. Well, now you're seeing the defense come around. And when you can combine an offense that's really good with a defense that, it's not the same level as the offense, but it should be at least good. then you get these results, which is one of the best teams in the NBA when you combine the two.
Funny enough, that note of like taking things more personal on the defensive end, I do think that like even a little bit maybe coincides with, the lineup change that we did see from Ime Udoka, right? Going away from the double big for those first two games, even though the double big has still been fantastic in its, albeit much shorter kind of spurts throughout a game now. Ime going to it as kind of a situational advantage as opposed to just carte blanche starting with the double big or that jumbo Monstars lineup, because we are still seeing some clunkiness at times where the spacing is a little off, or guys are unsure of how to play off of one another quite just yet. So kind of minimizing that and starting with Josh Okogie, having that other kind of point of attack defender to really help set the tone defensively to start some of these games has certainly felt like a notable shift over these first four and along this kind of win streak. Josh Okogie has been truly like a revelation. Like I really thought Okogie was going to be like a de facto member of the stay ready crew, like an insurance policy guy at the end of the bench. I did not expect him. If we had done like a Rockets bingo card for the season, I would not have expected Josh Okogie to be not only tagged with like rotation minutes, but being a starter for this team. I would not have had him ahead of other guys like a Tari, Eason, or an Aaron Holiday type, other guys that have situationally been starters in the past, who have been big contributors for this team, as recently as last season. And so Josh Okogie in his role has been fantastic for this Rockets team. And, he's certainly earning himself, maybe a spot in the rotation, even upon the eventual return of a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith whenever he eventually gets healthy and makes it back to the rotation. But has there been anything that you've looked at across these first 6 games that has, I guess, surprised you about this team, right? We did our predictions. We thought about what this team would look like when we got into the season, when we actually saw them starting to play games. Is there anything that surprised you so far?
Josh Okogie is certainly one of them. I think that was a very good bet by Rafael Stone in the offseason. Like, his perimeter defense, if you pay attention, has been elite for a long time. And he shot 35% on threes last year at decent volume. And that's just one season. But if that's sustainable, and to this point, it largely has been, the Dallas game being the one exception, hopefully that continues to be an exception, then he's going to play. The defense is just that valuable. And I completely agree with you. The double big, the overall numbers are still very good, but you need the ability to pivot away from it. We actually saw it in the fourth quarter against the Mavericks when it felt like the Rockets were about to put them away. Dallas hit a couple of threes, and then Ime Udoka backed off, because especially against these lesser teams, giving up the volume of threes that the double big often does, especially if there's no Jabari Smith Jr., he's questionable for tonight in Memphis, so is Steven Adams, then that can be the ticket to letting a lesser team hang around because they're taking and potentially making more threes. So if you bring that double big off the bench, I think it gives you a lot more fluidity in terms of you can use it when it's working. And if it looks like it's not, then you can easily pivot away from it, much more so than if you're starting it and your rotations get really clunky if you try and panic after 2 or 3 minutes. Although Ime did do that in the Dallas game, bringing Aaron Holiday off the shelf for his first real minutes of the season. The other thing that's maybe we should have seen it coming in the aftermath of Eurobasket, but it has surprised me a little bit. Even on a team with Kevin Durant, it feels like Alperen Sengun for most of this season has been at the top of the scouting report for other teams trying to defend the Rockets. And I think that's why his assist numbers have gone up. And you have it on the rundown there. We're going to talk about his playmaking leap. He was below 5 assists per game last year. Now he's at 7.3. The Mavs were a little bit of an exception, I think, because they have so many bigs, a lot of athleticism, a lot of strength. It looked like they wanted to play a little bit more straight up. And to Alpe's credit, he went out and one-on-one made some plays late in that game, including the big bucket that finally got some separation. Also should have gotten the assist to Josh Okogie, because even though Okogie didn't make the shot, he did make the free throws, which were set up by the pass. So I think on a team with Kevin Durant, my expectation going into the year was for KD to draw a ton of attention and for Alpe to potentially feast as a scorer. He's done that to some extent, but when you look at the numbers, the overall field goal percentage is slightly down, but the assists are up. And what I think that reflects is, even with KD on the floor, people are still selling out, for the most part, Dallas excluded, to take Alperen Sengun out of the game. And he's responding, quite frankly, as he should. He's taking what the defense gives him. A lot of games that's been, making plays for his teammates against the Mavs because they defended a little bit differently. He became a bit more aggressive as a scorer. But I just think even on a team with Kevin Durant, the extent to which teams are loading up to try and deny Alperen Sengun, that has surprised me a little bit.
Coming up, we're going to get more into the Alperen Sengun playmaking leap and what we've seen out of him so far this season, as well as taking a look ahead at the matchup with the Grizzlies, and also why Ja Morant is not a viable trade target for this Rockets team. Please, can we dead this conversation very quickly? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every single game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, you can head on over to FanDuel.com. Take a look at the odds-on favorites to win the title this season in the NBA. Right now, the Thunder still the favorites at plus 200. The Nuggets and Cavs behind them at plus 700 apiece. Got the Knicks in fourth place at plus 1,200, and the Lakers sitting at plus 1,400. Rockets sitting at plus 2,000, steadily creeping up the list. You like to see that. Right now, FanDuel's giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Today's episode is also brought to you by Rougiet. Let's be real. Making excuses doesn't solve anything. You've heard them all before, right? It's just stress. I'm tired. It happens to everyone sometimes. But when it comes to performance, sometimes your body just needs a little extra support. And that's where Rougiet comes in. Rougiet.com offers fast-acting, doctor-prescribed treatments for ED designed to help you stop making excuses and start making moves. Rougiet makes it easy to get started. You just connect with a board-certified doctor 100% online. No awkward waiting rooms, no in-person appointments. If prescribed, your treatment ships discreetly straight to your doorstep. The process is fast, simple, and private, and it's all handled by real doctors. Visit Rougiet.com/LockedOnNBA to get 15% off your first order. That's Rougiet, RUGIET.com/LockedOnNBA. And don't forget to use our code LockedOnNBA so that they know that we sent you. Rougiet, stop making excuses and start making moves. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, been kind of continuing this conversation about Alperen Sengun's playmaking leap. Shout out to a good friend of the program, Midi Data, who pulled the numbers for Alperen Sengun to start last season and then to start this season. And through the first 6 games last season, he was averaging 3.7 assists per game, only 22 assists total. Through the first 6 games this season, he's averaging double that, 7.3 assists per game, and a total of 44 assists, so a plus 22 increase. And some of that has to do with, obviously, you get Kevin Durant. You have a guy like Kevin Durant that LP now has as a weapon offensively to be able to facilitate to. Absolutely, the KD gravity opening certain things up offensively for LP and for his teammates. But a lot of it is just the Rockets truly, finally, for the first time after many, many years of fans begging for it, embracing this, shin hub offense. We hear, Craig Ackerman talking about shin hub on the broadcast, and we're finally seeing, I think, this version of Houston Rockets basketball that might have been achievable in years past, but with just not the right personnel to really, pull it off and really lean all the way into Alperen Sengun's playmaking ability. And in a weird way, this is one of those, if you're trying to find some semblance of a silver lining behind the Fred VanVleet injury, it's that we probably wouldn't have, I can't even say we probably wouldn't have. We might not have seen this version of Shin Hub or seen the Rockets embrace Alperen Sengun's playmaking this quickly because they're having to do it. They're having to do it out of necessity because Fred isn't out there. I still think they would have gotten to this point because it very much feels like, Kevin Durant is very bought in on what Alperen Sengun is as a player, what he's capable of doing on the basketball floor. We saw him in a response to another good friend of the program, Roosh Williams, kind of a back and forth, a little Twitter exchange where he talked about, 28 sees everything on the floor. And when you have that kind of sign off from a future first ballot Hall of Famer, or the blockbuster acquisition that you brought in to make yourself a bona fide contender, it feels like KD's bought in on Alperen Sengun as a player, as the fulcrum of this offense. And so I think they would have gotten there eventually, but maybe not as quickly as what we're seeing with the absence of Fred VanVleet this season.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially the point Sengun possessions, which we saw a little bit of late in the Dallas game. I don't think you would have Alperen Sengun bringing the ball up the floor as much if Fred VanVleet was out there. And I do think that's pushing this along. Like, you can run some Shinhab, even if Fred VanVleet was hypothetically available, but I don't think you would have as many possessions starting with Alperen Sengun, which makes it more likely that he's going to generate a quick advantage and then do more playmaking for his teammates. Yeah, I think it's a combination of things that certainly contributes. They have better shooting. They have better off-ball movement. It's not just a men. Jabari's cutting and diving a little bit more this year. Reed's someone when he's in the game. I know fans are focused on the mistakes he makes, but he does move well off the ball, and I think that potentially plays well with Sengun as well. So I think overall the pieces around him are better this year. And I think, moving forward, one thing that I think, and we saw encouraging signs of this against the Mavericks, but the Rockets are just going to get better and better, I think, at feeling out a game and being able to shift on the fly. Like, I think one thing that went wrong in that Pistons game, and maybe to some extent the Oklahoma City one as well, for the first three quarters, it felt like Alperen Sengun was option one on the defensive scouting report for who to take away. But then when it got to the fourth quarter, it feels like, and it certainly did against Dallas, as soon as Kevin Durant makes a shot or two, people get really afraid of Kevin Durant when the possessions are super high leverage, maybe when three-pointers are even more important. And so at that point, it becomes more incumbent on Sengun to create as a scorer. And so being able to flip the switch between playmaking and scoring, a lot of it depends on what the defense is giving you. And I think we saw midway through the fourth quarter of the Dallas game, KD hit those 2 threes. And then as soon as he hit those 2 threes, you started seeing Dallas send the help defender to him 35, 40 feet from the bucket like it was 2019 unguardable toward James Harden. And so from there, we saw a different version of Sengun where he started being more aggressive, attacking quickly the 4-on-3s that result on the backside. And so I think that's the sort of the challenge, but also the evolution. Like, teams are going to defend the Rockets differently depending on game situation, or just to mix it up and to show different looks. And so as this team gets more accustomed to playing with one another, then hopefully Sengun and Amen as well can learn how to flip the switch. When am I looking to primarily be a playmaker? When am I looking for my own offense? Because, boy, to me, the low-hanging fruit that's still out there, these 4-on-3 scenarios where they've been okay, and there was a possession against the Mavs where Sengun fed a cutting Amen. But, boy, if you can get both Sengun and Amen going downhill, one of them with the ball in a 4-on-3 scenario, you should be able to do some really special things to really punish defenses for covering Kevin Durant the way the Mavs, the Pistons, and the Thunder often did late in those games when it gets to, half-court execution time, last few minutes of a tight game. So that's the one thing moving forward. By and large, in the macro, Sengun's leap as a playmaker is real. That's the most important theme going forward as the Rockets play closer games, because the schedule is going to get more difficult. You got the Spurs and Bucks this weekend. Then I think being able for certainly Alpi, but also Kevin and Amen to sort of flip back and forth between when they're the playmaker, when they're the scorer, knowing when to sort of take over a game in each capacity. That's going to be the big secret moving forward.
I just want to put it out there, like, right now, just because I want to stake the claim, like, very early on this. And I think we talked about this, during some, a couple of our preview pods or in the build up and the lead up to the season. But, Alperen Sengun last year, had he just cleaned up a little bit of his, finishing issues around the rim, would have been in the MVP conversation with as good as the Rockets were as a team. This year, I think it's also a possibility. Like, I think that Alperen Sengun MVP votes, right? This was something that, go back to what you talked about on our preview show, right? Is, Alperen Sengun is not far. I mean, right now, you look at the counting stats alone, 22.8 points per game, 8.8 rebounds, 7.3 assists. To go with a steal and a half, too, I think we mixed in there somewhere. That plus the newfound 3-point shooting, right? The floor spacing ability, which hopefully, knock on wood, that holds up. And you just look at how unbelievably potent the Rockets offense is when he's on the floor versus when he's off the floor. Like, it's like a 25-point swing or something nuts. I don't have the numbers directly in front of me. I should have pulled them up before we hit record. But I saw them in passing, and it was jarring. It was Jokic levels of drop off when Sengun is not on the floor for this Rockets team offensively. And as amazing as Kevin Durant is, and he is very clearly still this team's best player, Alperen Sengun is the most maybe integral player to this team because of how vital he is to everything that they do from a playmaking perspective, from what he provides as a big on the defensive side of the floor, how he complements all the other players up and down this roster. This thing doesn't work without Alperen Sengun playmaking in the middle of the floor and really elevating all of his teammates, right? Obviously, you know, that two-man duo with him and Kevin Durant, they play so well off of one another, and we're still only 6 games in. Like, they're still learning and figuring things out. And as they develop an even better, stronger chemistry with one another, I mean, I think we could be midway through the season, Ben, and I think we're going to be talking about Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun as the best two-man duo in the entire NBA at some point this year.
Yeah, you could be. And I think especially early in the year, Alperen Sengun is so important to this Rockets team, because if you look at the two-man data, the biggest discrepancy, the Rockets are fantastic with Alperen Sengun and Ime Thompson. They're simply pretty good with Kevin Durant and Ime Thompson. And I think what a lot of that comes down to, Ime is one of the most unique players in the NBA. There aren't a lot of comparables. And so in terms of that big three, Alperen is much more used to playing with Ime and getting him the ball where he needs it, and vice versa, than Kevin Durant is. So as the year progresses, I think KD will get much more used to playing with Ime, and they do have some complementary skills. But early on, the 2 years of experience that Alpi has with Ime, I think that's really important for the Rockets to lean into. As, you know, again, for context, the net ratings, it's like plus 25 with Sengun and Ime. With KD and Ime, it's like plus 9. So it's certainly not bad. We're just talking about the difference between good and elite. But I do think early on, you know, Ime's such a unique player. The fact that Sengun and Ime have all these synergies, it buys time for KD to sort of feel his way into a new system, which, as good as he looks from an efficiency perspective, yeah, it is a brand new team. There are going to be some growing pains. And one last point on Alpi and the finishing. I saw a couple of tweets today pointing out that, you know, the field goal percentage is down from a year ago. As long as the assists are up, then there's a very easy pushback to that, and it's accurate. The field goal percentage, the finishing is down because he's getting so much more attention. And it's shown because look at the assist numbers. He's creating for his teammates because he's getting those second and sometimes even third defenders, and it's leading to better offense for his teammates on now the most efficient offense in the entire NBA. So in terms of the field goal percentage being down, even though threes are up, I'm inclined to think a lot of it's just small sample size theater. Look, we're only 6 games into the year, but if it continues, look, as long as the assists are up and he's generating offense at this rate for the best offense in the NBA, then what are you complaining about? Like, he's one of the 2 best players on a team that right now is the best offense and the 7th best defense. I mean, what is there to complain about? That sounds like certainly an all-star and a borderline MVP candidate to me.
Yeah, I'll take that trade-off 8 different days till Sunday, because the 3-point shooting was going to be such a swing factor in Alperen Sengun just being a year in, year out all-star player versus being a borderline potential superstar, right? Because the 3 ball is what's going to separate him and give him even more wiggle room in his game to be able to open things up for him, for his teammates. And we're seeing that so far this season. The fact that defenders legitimately have to treat him as a 3-point threat. They can't just sag off of him. They can't ignore him at the 3-point line. It's opening up so much.
Yep. And the free throws are up as well, which makes defenders more reluctant to foul him and thus opens up more for the entire team.
Free throws are up across the team. Shout out Cam Hodges for making everybody sign contracts. We love that over here. Coming up, we'll talk about why Ja Morant is an awful idea for this Rockets team, as well as what we want to see out of their matchup against the Memphis Grizzlies. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Gusto. Let's be real. No one starts a business for the joy of calculating tax withholdings or managing payroll spreadsheets. That's where Gusto comes in, to take the stress out of payroll, benefits, and HR so you can focus on running your business and supporting your team. Gusto is the all-in-one remote-friendly payroll and HR platform that makes managing your team simple, transparent, and fast. Whether you're hiring, onboarding, or paying employees, Gusto helps you do it all from one place without the hassle or hidden fees. Unlimited payroll runs for one monthly price, which means no surprise charges at the end of the month. Gusto's automated tools like offer letters, onboarding materials, and direct deposits save tons of hours every single week. Try Gusto today at gusto.com/lockedonnba and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's right, 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/lockedonnba. One more time, that's gusto.com/lockedonnba. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Ben, I don't want to spend maybe too much time on this whole Ja Morant thing, but obviously, like, there's been the news, the rumors, the reporting, everything surrounding his situation in Memphis. And is he happy? Does he have his joy with basketball? Ben, do you have your joy with basketball this season with the Rockets?
The last week, yes. The first 4 days, not as much.
I still had joy even after the opening game because it was such a hard-fought, crazy game.
No, but I was pissed after the Pistons game.
Yeah, the Pistons game was a little different.
Yeah.
But okay, so the Ja situation, like, here's the thing. First off, it's damn near impossible from a financial perspective. Like, you could maybe swing it, but like, it's basically borderline impossible. And then secondly, Ja would just be an awful fit on this Rockets team. Like, I think that the days of Ja Morant being like the superstar that he once was, like for like a couple seasons there, are long past. Like, Ja is not anywhere near the same player he used to be. The athleticism isn't going to suddenly get better as he ages. He's not a great shooter. He's not a good defender. Like, there's not a ton of things that you like about Ja Morant as far as trying to fit into the construct of what this Rockets team is in the here and now. And I think it would be a step backwards, actually, if the Rockets tried to trade for Ja Morant, given whatever they'd have to give up to actually get him, and factoring in his actual fit alongside the pieces that would be left over after a Ja trade. That's just how I feel about it. I think it'd be a terrible decision for the Rockets to go after Ja.
Yeah, I do too. And I'll preface this by saying, look, if the data changes over the next few months, we can have a different conversation at the trade deadline next offseason. Again,
no, Ben, we dig our heels in and we do not change our mind when presented with new information. Okay, that's the no, of course.
Locked in on Locked On. Yeah, that's the
God,
that's the mantra. Sorry for the worst pun ever. Look, there is a point of diminishing returns when it comes to high-level offense in the NBA, and this is no longer the 1990s where you're running, constant pick and rolls with a so-called traditional point guard. No, as we saw late in that win over the Mavs, the Rockets had their 5 initiating offense from 35, 40 feet out. You have 3 really good players in Kevin Durant-Alperen Sengun, and Ime Thompson, and you can sort of take turns, take what the defense gives you, look for the most advantaged matchup, and use those guys to attack, initiate, create advantages, and get the best shot you can for the team. They do not need a point guard for the sake of having a point guard. Now, there are certain times in a game where, yeah, it'd be nice to have the steadying presence of an extra ball handler and someone like what Fred VanVleet did at times last year that can settle you down. But there needs to be a cap on their usage rate. A player like Ja Morant, it's not going to slide into a complementary role. They are the system, a lesser version of the, I think of the James Harden quote, I'm the system, but he's not even as good as James Harden. So just as the Rockets didn't go after James Harden for a reason a couple of years ago, the same applies now, even more so, because you've got not just Alperen Sengun, but you've got a blossoming Ime Thompson, you've got Kevin Durant. You need to milk those guys as much as possible. So, yeah, in a perfect world, would you be able to add, a high floor, steady point guard? Yes, ideally, it would simply be Fred VanVleet returning by March or April. Time will tell as to whether that's realistic. I know they're still at least hoping for it, even if, medical science tells us that it's unlikely. But I don't think going to, one of the higher tiers really makes sense, because there's a point of diminishing returns. There's only so many touches to go around. And right now you need those big 3 to get as many touches as possible. Like Jason Kidd, and he's a really good coach and a Hall of Fame point guard, by the way, said before the Dallas game, went out of his way. One of the reporters asked him about Amen's defense, and he went out of his way to talk about Amen's offense and his ability to drive and pressure the rim and handle the ball, putting so much cumulative pressure on the defense with how he can make you respect so many areas of the floor. When he had that dynamic first half, there was a possession I thought was hilarious where D'Angelo Russell backed off like 10 or 12 feet and Ime still bullied him just right through him. Like, he was trying everything he could to bait Ime into taking, a 22, 23-foot 3 from the top of the key. And Ime said, nope, I'm still going to go right through you. And he did, and he finished. And Ime is just that rare of an athlete. He's that special. And this is not the old school NBA. You don't need the biggest name at point guard to have the biggest name as a point guard. You need to run offense through your top playmakers. And as long as your top playmakers are as good as these 3 are right now, and we hope they continue to be, then to me, there's a point of diminishing returns. And I wouldn't want an acquisition of that style. I just don't think it's a stylistic fit.
All right, let's take a quick look ahead at the Rockets-Grizzlies matchup here to round out our episode. And Rockets, you mentioned it earlier, Ben, but right now, obviously still no Dorian Finney-Smith, but Steven Adams, Jabari Smith Jr., both questionable to play against the Grizzlies. It would certainly make things a bit more difficult for the Rockets to lose both of those guys in this matchup. Yeah. I don't think they're at a point where they can, they've got depth, but those are two very high-level impact contributors for this Rockets team. And so, maybe this situation where whichever one of them is closer to being ready to go plays and the other one sits the game out, something along those lines. Not that this team's like desperate for wins right now, but you don't want to lose the momentum that you're building off this 4-game win streak. That's for sure. On the Grizzlies side, they're still missing a bunch of key contributors. So no Zach Edey, no Ty Jerome, no Scottie Pippen Jr., and no Brandon Clark for them. What are you hoping to see out of this matchup, Ben? What are you looking for from this Rockets squad to continue building on this win streak that they've got going?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think it would be a real shame if one, or especially if both Steven and Jabari are out, because I think this is a team that on paper you should be able to go big against for a decent chunk of the game and not be punished. Like, this is a bottom 10 shooting team. You mentioned the pieces in the backcourt they're missing. Ty Jerome, Scottie Pippen, those are guys that can really shoot the ball. You look at who they're starting at the 2 and the 3. I think it's Jalen Wells, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. They have been dreadful to this point in the season. So the one thing you worry about with extended double big is, are you going to let a lesser team hang around by making threes? Well, Memphis does take a lot of threes. They're in the top 10 in the league in attempts, but they're in the bottom 10 of the league in makes. Like, they have been really dreadful from a shooting perspective. So you do need the ability to pivot. I don't know that I would start the double big, simply because if it's a game where they're hot, then you do need to be able to switch strategies much more freely. But on paper, I like what Alperen Sengun and Steven Adams could potentially do in this matchup. They do have a good front court of Jaren Jackson Jr. and the potential for a Jock Landale revenge game. So you got to account for that. But no, I just think as long as it's not an outlier shooting game for Memphis, then hopefully Houston has ideally all of its big bodies, but if not all of them, and let's say only down one, and either Steven or Jabari are able to play. Now, the flip side, look, you had that really huge NBA Cup game in San Antonio on Friday. Maybe you're looking at it saying, hey, we'll err on the side of caution to make sure guys are fresh for that. Memphis on paper, 3-5 is a weaker opponent. Like, there's a case to be made for that. But in terms of the matchup, yeah, I hope they have at least one of those guys, ideally both, because if you do, then I think this is a matchup where if the Rockets are big enough to control the Grizzlies on the glass and prevent Jaren Jackson Jr. from doing too much damage on the interior, then the Rockets just have a lot more firepower, and I don't think the Grizzlies should be able to keep up.
Speaking of containing Jaren Jackson Jr., right? This was a Rockets team that, after making the switch to move Jabari to the bench last year and starting him in Thompson in his place, in one of the, it was one, maybe two matchups with the Grizzlies after that lineup change had taken effect. And Dylan Brooks was the primary defender on Jaren Jackson Jr. in that. And tried as he may, he was giving up a lot of size and a lot of height in that matchup. And I find that very curious here, just because Jaren Jackson Jr. is kind of a matchup nightmare for a lot of opposing bigs. And, they're running Jock Landale, Jaren Jackson Jr. as their starting 4-5 combo. If you're Ime Udoka, Ben, do you potentially venture into starting Clint Capela if Steven Adams is unavailable for this game?
I lean to no, but I would be ready to make a quick change. At least I wouldn't in the first half. Maybe in the second half, like we saw against the Mavs, where Ime felt they needed a spark, they needed more shooting. Like, he put Aaron Holiday in at the 9-minute mark of the third quarter. I wouldn't start the group with Okogie has been too good, assuming his knee is good to go. And I think it should be. He's not on the injury report, but I would have it as, something they can turn to. And
they might be missing, if they're missing Jabari and Adams. That's what I'm saying, is like, you might still be able to start Okogie. And what would be your starting lineup? Or do you just roll with Tari, Eason again in the starting lineup?
I would roll with Tari, Eason. I think you need more steady 3-point shooting. Like, Okogie's been better than expected, but he's not a volume guy. I just think the spacing would be too clunky if it's Capela, Sengun, and Okogie as three of your starting five, and a man in there too. Like, even with Kevin Durant, I think that's pretty rough. So I would start Tari in that. One other point I wanted to get to, though, in terms of defending Jaren Jackson Jr., it could also be a preview of how you defend Wemby on Friday night, because just as Dylan had really good reps on Jaren Jackson Jr., we know Dylan the last couple of years was so instrumental to how the Rockets successfully defended Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs. So the big question going into that showdown on Friday, how are the Rockets going to defend Wemby without Dylan Brooks? Who's going to be their Wemby stopper? Jaren Jackson Jr. is not an identical player by any means. He's not 7'5", but there are some similarities in terms of the matchup difficulty. So who succeeds, who doesn't against Jaren, that might play into a little bit what you're thinking for Friday and, how you try and stop the ridiculous machine that is Victor Wembanyama.
One other thing I want to just throw out here as a quick note is I desperately want to see this Rockets team become a better team at using challenges. Like, they struggled all of last year. They were very bad at challenges. And so far this year, there were the two challenges that they used against the Mavs. Look, I'll give them credit because one of them, I believe, wiped away what would have been Alperen Sengun. I think at that point it would have been his third foul.
No, it would have been his first foul. It would have been his first foul. Yeah, but it ended up being important because he got to 5 fouls.
Because he got to 5. Okay, fair enough. He got to 5. Sorry, I was trying to think back to like where it happened in the game flow. I thought he'd already picked up a couple at that point. Either way, point being, right, is like maybe it saved Alperen Sengun from being, tossed later in the game. So like you can look at it from that perspective. But to me, and this is like the hill that I'm willing to die on, is like, if a challenge is not actively like erasing points or giving you points that you would have otherwise had, like, it's a waste of a challenge. Like, I get it. Sometimes there's just such a blatantly obvious call and you're like, okay, we can guarantee one extra possession or something. But like, I just feel like that's such a, I don't know, man. Like I feel like if I was the head coach of the team, I'd be, and again, and just as a little bit of clarity, this is not Ime Udoka's fault. Ime does not call the challenges. Right. Like he listens to the players and he sees if they react and they're like, oh my God, it's a, do the thing, whatever the replay, hand gesture. But he looks down and he's got a guy on the bench.
Yeah.
One of the Rockets assistant coaches, one of the video guys, they're in charge of deciding whether or not that challenge is good or not. And Ime has to take their word for it when he looks down there. So Ime is like the gatekeeper of the challenges. He's like, are we doing it or are we not? And he ultimately makes the call. But he does not have all the information, all the footage at hand to make those educated decisions.
Yeah. And so for me, it just comes down to there needing to be a sufficient reward. I'm right there with you. There's too many challenges where even if they win them, it's not that they're spotting calls that were correct and just challenging stupidly. No, it's more that even if they're right, there's just not enough to be gained. And in a system where you don't have very many challenges, and if one goes wrong, you're done right then and there. You've got to be a little more judicious, in my opinion, with how you use those and save them for the truly impactful plays where maybe it's the difference between, a 3-point play and an offensive foul, something like that, like to where there's actually a clear reward. Or I know you can argue that because it saved Sengun a foul and ended up with 5, but maybe the entire rest of the game plays out differently. For me, the difference between 0 and 1, that's not that big of a deal. So yeah, I would like to see them be a little more big picture oriented with not just saying, hey, is this call right or wrong, but what do I get if I successfully get this call overturned? And if it's just, the other team gets the ball anyway and it's a side out, then at the end of the day, like, what have you really accomplished there? It's just the reward is not worth the risk in those scenarios.
I also really want to see him and Thompson punch it on Jock Landale. Not that I have like any ill will towards Jock Landale. He was a very pleasant guy while he was here.
Extremely pleasant.
But like, how cool would that? I mean, it's ex Rockets revenge is what it is. And that the players are going to want to get up for this matchup, and Amin is going to have a little extra juice. Maybe if he has an opportunity for a poster on Jock Landale, you can bet that he's going to take it. So we'll see what happens there ultimately. But we want your thoughts in the YouTube comments about the start of this Rocket season, their turnaround from the 0-2 start. What stood out to you about this team, how you're feeling about Alperen Sengun's playmaking leap, as well as what you're looking for in this matchup with the Grizzlies. Let us know all your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Ben, you know the drill. Let me know where to track you down at.
Yep. Ben DuBose on Twitter and Blue Sky, or X and Blue Sky. And Rockets... I should know that. We had to rebrand. So we're now the Rockets Launch Pod through 790. And I'm looking this up on the fly. Our new handle on X is...
Just vamp for a second. Just vamp.
Yeah, I know. Well, now my Twitter is freezing. But yeah, it's LaunchPod 790. That's what it is. Sorry about that. So yeah, LaunchPod 790 and at Ben DuBose. And rocketswire.usatoday.com for all your daily Houston Rockets news coverage. The Rockets Wire on X. Now my plugs are complete. Sorry for the most disjointed plugs that you'll ever get to.
We struggled our way through it just like the Rockets against the Mavs, but thank you so much, Ben. That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.